tarmac for an hour things, but what we're going to do today is I am going to do my standard thing, which means that you give a university-trained guy a microphone and he'll start talking. I have a little 15-minute talk I prepared. I used to do things like more directly related to my books, but I got tired of that after about the 10th year of doing them. And so now I kind of go off on a random tangent. So hopefully this will be interesting to you. After that, I'll do a Q&A. We'll do a Q&A for maybe another 15 minutes, and then I have a reading. The reading is 15 to 20 minutes long. And then we will do a few more announcements and go into the actual signing thing. You guys are old hands at this by now, most of you. You've done this many times here. So, my speech this time starts off with me going to Sharjah. Does anyone know where Sharjah is? No, no one knew last night either. I had no idea before I was invited. Sharjah is one of the United Arab Emirates. Dubai and Abu Dhabi are the famous ones that most people know. Sharjah is right next to Dubai. They invited me to come out and do a book signing at a book festival. And I thought, number one, yes, that sounds awesome. Number two, people read fantasy books in Sharjah? I mean, it's like on the Arabian Peninsula, right? It's like right next to Saudi Arabia. But hey, they were offering me a free ticket, so I went. I posted on my Twitter feed. You can go back and look. There are pictures of me and these giant sand dunes, like enormous sand dunes. They're so cool. I made some Arrakis jokes and things like that. You can tell I'm a nerd, because I didn't even think, Lawrence of Arabia or whatever. I'm like, I'm on Dune! And to fly like in a helicopter for 45 minutes just over dunes and dunes and dunes. And finally got to like the oasis. And then we got in jeeps and then drove on the dunes and dunes and dunes. So I went to Sharjah and I went to my book signing there. And it was a very interesting experience because I'm walking up kind of, somewhat, I'm curious, let's just say that. I'm like, who's going to be here, right? And I go into the place of the signing and there is a big line of people wearing traditional Islamic clothing. The women had the hijab. You know what that is? It leaves the face open. It's the black kind of headdress, and then the black dress. And the men were wearing the thawb, which is the white outfit with the white headdress and the little band around it and things like that. And they're all carrying these big stacks of branded Sanderson books, right? Like you guys have. The ones I'm sorry about how heavy those are. Like these big stacks of books. And I stopped and I looked at this line and I'm like, oh, these are my people, right? I've flown halfway across the world to a very different culture, a very, sand dunes everywhere and things like this, and yet here are a bunch of fantasy fans. And it felt so cool to me to be able to sit and chat with them. One of the ladies in line had just gone to Comic-Con in Dubai. There's a Comic-Con in Dubai, and this is the cool thing. She went as No-Face from the Miyazaki film Spirited Away, which if you think about it, she's wearing the full black outfit already, right? And then she just put the mask on. She said it was the easiest costume ever. But I had long conversations with Lightspeed, very nice signing, and it just really struck me again, the power of storytelling and of writing. I look back, and I can read books that were written 3,000 years ago and experience what somebody was thinking and feeling in a different country 3,000 years ago, and I can read that and say, oh yeah, I felt that before. That is the power of storytelling, and this is really cool, and what it led me to is thinking about King Sejong the Great. Do you guys follow me? That's where it sent off to you, right? Sejong the Great, King Sejong. So Sejong the Great, I'm just going to grab one of my Sharpies here. Sejong the Great is a 14th or 15th century king of Korea. And Sejong is super cool. He's one of the coolest guys to ever live. He's just awesome. You hear about this, but when he came to power, one of the things he did is he gathered together like a secret team of scholars. Didn't tell anybody he was doing this. He got this group together, and they did like this secret thing. He's kind of like the Jason Bourne of ancient Confucian scholar kings. And what they did is they started researching language and writing. Now see, in Korea during that time, in fact most of the region, what people used is they wrote in Chinese, regardless of what language they spoke. Does anyone here speak Chinese? No? I'm sorry for what I'm about to write. My Chinese is so bad. My stroke art is just going to make you wince. But they would all write in Chinese. And Chinese is an awesome writing system, right? I'm gonna write some Chinese here. And it's going to be really sloppy, and I'm sorry. Oh, there's a line there. And then there's like one that goes like that. Okay, that's the one he wasn't supposed to see because the stroke order is so bad. And then there's this, and then it kind of goes like this, and like that, and there's one right here and right that, I think. That says Korea, right? And the cool thing about this is two characters. These ones are together. These are characters is what we call logographic. If you just know that picture, what they mean, you can read it. Right? Doesn't matter if you speak Mongolian, if you speak Thai, if you speak Japanese, they still use these things. You can write it down, say, bathroom. You can write bathroom in all the different languages, that's bathroom in all the different languages, which is really cool. You can see why it was a useful language to use if you were wanting to trade with lots of different countries. And the problem with it is that it's not phonetic. You can't sound this out for the most part. You can't look at it and say, oh yeah, that's Han and that's Gook. I can see the H and the K. No, you just can't. And so, to read Chinese, you gotta memorize a whole ton of these characters. And for King Sejong's people, who were mostly poor farmers, they couldn't do it. It was just, they didn't have the time, they didn't have the life experience, they could not read, and they couldn't really be taught to read, because you approach and say, okay, we're going to teach you 10,000 characters, and then you'll be able to read. It just didn't work. The other big problem was, this uses Chinese grammar, but Korean does not use Chinese grammar. Korean has a very different grammatical structure, and so in Chinese, when they would write things out, they couldn't write any of the Korean grammar. They couldn't conjugate, for instance. Imagine trying to write English in a language where you couldn't conjugate, you couldn't use possessives, at least not in the way you're used to. You couldn't use, the Korean has like subject markers to say, this is the person doing the thing. They just couldn't do any of this. And so Sejong got his secret scholar team of Jason Bourne's, I don't know about that metaphor, but he got his team together and he said, I want to come up with a way to teach my people how to write. And they invented something we call Hangul. And I'm going to write, say Hangul is phonetic. That's H-A-N-K-U-K. Oh, there's it. Hanguk, which means Korea. And you can actually sound that out. You're like, oh, that's an H. It's a really sloppy one. So you post this on the internet. People say H-A-N-K-U-K. I'm sloppy when I write in English. Put me in other languages. Just watch my writing lectures. You'll know how sloppy I am. You can sound this out. It is actually really cool. I love this language. The cool thing about this is you kind of construct a Chinese character, and so you could you could use them with the Chinese characters because they fit the same space, except they were phonetic, and so you could intermix them and things like that. Really nifty. In fact, I used this as the inspiration for Elantris. The writing system and the aeons and Elantris came from this relationship between Chinese and Korean, because even today, the Koreans will use the Chinese when they want to look cool. Right? When they write their name, they're like, here's all the Chinese in my cool name, and stuff like that. Like, you get the newspapers in Korea, anything they want to look awesome, they use the Chinese, and it's surrounded by all this Korean. That's where the idea for the Sions came from. If you've read it, they've got these really cool characters they'll write and be like, this is cool, and stuff like that. So King Sejong, he brings this wonderful language out to introduce it to everybody in the court, and their response was, they hated it. They hated it. In fact, I have, in English, I tried reading the Korean, it was really hard. Ancient Korean, it's like, try reading Chaucer, but in Korean. He wrote, how could this not be a setback to our civilization? Spending too much thought and effort on this is a waste of time, detrimental to the timely pursuit of scholarship. He wrote that in Chinese. That's another problem. So, the scholars hated this. Does anyone have a guess why?
Like you.
Yeah, it's because at that time, reading Chinese was the mark of a scholar. It took a lot of effort and time, and scholars were the ones that got the very important jobs in the Confucian government. If you know anything about Confucianism, if you're a scholar, that's like top notch. It's like the most you can aspire to without being a king or sometimes a monk, depending on what type of society is going on. And so they're like, oh, this is what they kept saying is, oh, this is going to make relations with the Chinese really hard. They're going to hate the fact that we're not using the language anymore. But what they really meant is we don't want those people reading. We do not want those filthy, unwashed masses to be able to read our stuff. And this is not unique to Korea. This is something that throughout history, like you can read about all the people who got burned at the stake and stuff trying to translate the Bible into English. Or you can read about in the 1800s, the resistance to educational programs that were released. And there's always some sort of argument. They don't need it, or, oh, this is blasphemous, because there's always some sort of argument to keep the people from reading. Now, what does that have to do with us today, and why am I talking to you about this, and what does it have to do with Sharjah and things like that? Well, I actually think we do some of this today in a very different way. I'm going to read to you a blog I was reading a little while back that I found very interesting. This is by a blogger named Bonnie Burton, and she wrote, "As a geek girl, I've been accused of wearing Star Wars shirts to get attention from guys. I've been told to move to the side and let real gamers play the demos at conventions. Lately, it seems elements of geek community have become a lot less a welcome wagon and more a judgmental Jedi council that refuses to let newbies in, especially if they happen to be girls. In a community once known for celebrating outcasts and underdogs, it sometimes now seems like you have to take some sort of voight comp test to prove your geekdom is legit." And just to prove hers is legit, she included a Blade Runner reference. So this is actually something I've noticed. It's starting to bother me, and it's bigger than this one issue. It has to do with trying to get people to not love the things that we love for some reason. Like it seems like it's a very natural sort of thing. But when comic book movies started getting big, my friends were all like, "You guys aren't true nerds. You're just enjoying those movies. We read Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Iron Man or whatever it was way back when." And whenever something gets popular, we tend to kind of look down at it. Is anyone here? I've done it. This is part of what made me write this speech. Anyone made fun of Twilight? Aragon? Yeah. Yeah, whatever it is, like it seems like our discourse, and I think the internet is doing something to this that's kind of scary. Our discourse has stopped being, well, this is what I love and why I like it, and this is what I dislike and why I dislike it, and become, you are an idiot. You should not be reading that. And this is kind of a counterpoint to a lot of stuff I felt when I was in college. This is a different type of it, but my 1A minus in my master's program was from a professor who was a poet, and the book I was submitting was The Way of Kings. And he couldn't give me an A on that. He just couldn't make himself because it was this genre fiction trash. But within the genre fiction, we do the same thing. We're like, well, that's the trash over there. You shouldn't be reading that. You should read this great stuff. Now, I don't want to say we shouldn't criticize. Criticism is actually important. The scholarship of looking at why is a book working? Why is it not working? Why don't I like it? I'm not saying you have to like things. I'm not saying you have to be quiet about why you don't like them. But the problem is less about scholarship and more about shaming, right? When you start shaming people for what they read, you get into troubles with this sort of thing. And that kind of undermines this whole idea that books are about getting to know different people. They're about bringing together, a middle-aged woman living in the Middle East and a Mormon dude from Nebraska, right? Like, that is what fiction is about. And so, my challenge to you is, next time somebody's reading something that you're like, oh no, can I get them to not read that? How about instead, you read it yourself? Now, you don't have to like it. In fact, you probably won't. But what I want you to do is I want you to look at why they like it. And if you can figure out why they love that piece of writing, I think that will tell you a lot about them and will kind of forward this, advance this whole cause, the reason we tell stories in the first place, which is to get to know each other. Thank you very much.